So it's 8 o'clock. We'll start. We'll see. We have Tamara's actually here in person. There you go.
Hi, everyone.
I think Mark Burley's here, and then
Hi.
we got everyone on the screen. So again, today's question is a fascinating question. It's our second of the tshuvas from Chaim David Halevi. How can a redemptive era return, right? If we believe that this is a redemptive era, right? Naschalta de Geula, right? The beginning of a redemption, how could it be brought about by non-believers? Right? That's the question. Now, this question is posed to him in a very, very respectful way by one of his students who clearly is not on the same wavelength. So I'll scan it, but I'll read it to you in English. Let me just make sure that's not somebody at the door. Hold on. Oh, no, okay. No, it's good. All right, so essentially, we don't know who asked this question, but he starts, I don't, God forbid, wish to come and belittle you or complain against you. That's how you know what's coming next is going to be. Right? When you start the tshuva, eneni miskaven, I don't intend to know what's coming next. Right? He goes, ani marich otcha, right? I respect you. It's not on the source sheets. This is not on the source sheets. And I don't want to put like 5 pages of source sheets. So I have some of the stuff on the source sheets. This is not on the source sheet. Actually, that's a good reminder. Before we go, I'm going to load this source sheet right now before we start, so I don't forget. There we go. And in your chat, you should have, as soon as I hit send, all right, you should have it now in the chat. You have the source sheet. Essentially, he says, right, I respect you. You're a fabulous guy. I don't want to come after you, but it is very perplexing to me, right, how you have been caught up in the hashkafat tzionit pisula, right, in the puzzle, in the terrible Zionist ideology, right? He says, I read your writings, I read your books, right, in which you demonstrate strong faith, right, that this generation is the aschalta de geula. It's the beginning of the redemptive process, right? And he says, how can I accept this premise from you when the leaders of the Zionist movement from the time of its foundation until now are Porkei old Torah and Mitzvot? There are people who throw off the yoke of Torah and Mitzvot, right? They were socialists and they were communists and they were atheists. How can it be that these are the people bringing about Hashem's redemption, right? The head of state, Rosh Medinat. Right? How could it be? How could it be, he says, that from the hashgacha, from divine providence, if that's what you believe in, right? Why don't we have better agents to bring about the redemption of Israel? Right? Why don't we have somebody who looks more like the Chafetz Chaim than Ben Gurion? Right? I mean, that's essentially what he's asking. You can put in any, right, of the multitude of leaders that we have. He says, if you will answer my question, I will be very, very appreciative. So he starts the answer as follows, right? According to my opinion, he says that this redemption has to be a natural redemption. From now, we're going to jump to the source sheets. And again, there's a lot of answers to this question, a lot of ways to deal with it. This happens to be his particular tshuva, and that's what we're going to learn tonight. When I was in Gush for Binyamin Tabori, alav shalom, so he told us, he had once said something along the lines of, right, I understand that it would be nice if, right, it was the Chafetz Chaim leading the government in 1948, but that's not what Hashem planned for us, right? For him, it's just the miracle of Israel was so overwhelming that, okay, so you have thought A, Hashem had thought B, but the miracle of the existence of Israel, the wars, was just so demonstrative of the fact that this is a new era that it didn't bother him. Meaning, would he have rathered something else? Sure. But history, as the Rav said in Fate and Destiny, history proves that Yosef is correct, right? This is the history we're living through. We should appreciate it. He has a slightly different take. This is actually a fascinating take and an approach. He starts with psukim in the vision of Bilam. So if you look at your source sheet, and again, he could have quoted numerous Gemaras. He could have quoted other psukim, but this happens to be the sources that he started with. Right, so this is from Parshas Balak. You have the Hebrew and the English. Again, everyone has the source sheet?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, good. Right, right, go to my people. Hashem tells Bilam, right, go and I'm going to tell you what this people will do to your people in the days to come. Right, right, later days, maybe the end of days. Vayisam ishalo vayomar. Right, he takes up his parable and he says, Ne'um Bil'am beno be'or, u'ne'um ha'gever shetum ha'ayin. Right, this is the words of Bilam, the son of Be'or. Right, the word of man whose eye is true. Right, Ne'um Shomreya Imre'el. I hear the word. I hear it from Hashem. V'yodea dat elyon. I know Hashem's, right, the dot of Hashem. Right, Machazeh Shadei Eina. Machazeh Shadai Yechazeh. Right, the visions of Hashem I will see. Nofel uglui einayim. Right, I'm bent over, but my eyes are open. Right, so all of that is to say, I'm going to tell you what Hashem wants, right, what I know from Hashem, and this is what he says. Erena velo ata, right, I will see it or I see it, but not now. Ashurena velo karov, right, I see it, but it's not really close, right, what I behold is not really close. Darach kochav mi Yaakov, right, a star rises from Jacob, becomes Shevet mi Yisrael, right, a scepter comes forth in Israel. Umachat pa'atim Moab, it is going to smash the brow of Moab. Vikarkar kol b'nei Shet, the foundation of all the children of Shet. Right, so now that, what in the world does that mean? That's a good question. Right, it's poetic. It talks about the end of days. It talks about us beating down Moab. But there's certainly more there. And the track that he takes us is through the commentary of Yonatan ben Uziel, and then to a beautiful piece in the Or Chaim, right, the great Kabbalist from the 17th century in Morocco. So first, let me just put it out there. Does anyone have a clue what this means? Take a stab. When is this referring to? When is it happening?
I know that Bar Kokhba was called Bar Kokhba because of this pasuk. The Kochav Me'Yaakov, a star will go out to the Redeemer.
Right. So Bar Kokhba, right. So that's later in the future, but not the end of days. And probably in hindsight, that's not true because
but maybe it's referring to the Redeemer, and that's why they called him that.
Yeah. Right. So that means it refers to the Redeemer, just happened not to have been Bar Kokhba. So every time you have Acharit Hamim, we have at the end of Bereshis also, it either means at a later time or at the end of days. The Targum of Yonatan ben Uziel, right here I have the English in the Keter Yonatan. It says, "Vayirukon kol banav shel Shet miman hotav," right? Shel Gog she'atidin la'aroch ma'arach milchama beYisrael. Right, that is going to happen at the time of the war of Gog when they have a fight with Israel. Right, when does that happen? The war of Gog. Right, that is when? Not at a later date, but at the
end of days.
Right, that is a messianic redemptive era, and therefore he believes that this prophecy is talking about the end of days. It's talking about, right, a messianic time, maybe an aschalta de geula, right, a time where the redemption begins. Okay, now this is actually an amazing piece in the Or Chaim. So if you look back in a moment at Pasuk Yud Zayin, right, that's really the key pasuk. the Or HaChaim notes, I'm not going to read through all of it, but I did want you to have. I have the Hebrew and the English. The English is actually on Sefaria. Sefaria has the English Or HaChaim, which is pretty neat. Anyone who wants to learn Or HaChaim in English, you can do it on Sefaria. And if they have Balak, they probably have most of it. I think Rabbi Elio Monk did the translation. So if they got his permission, it's out. You certainly can enjoy it. He notes that there is a double language that runs throughout this entire pasuk. Right? Er'enu v'lo ata, right? I see it, but it's not now. Ashurenu v'lo karov. I behold it, but it's not near. Right? That's a repetition. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, good. Darach kochav mi Yaakov, right? The star rises, and then Vikam shevet mi Yisrael. Right? The scepter of the tribe rises from Israel. Also a repetition. Okay, it changes from Yaakov to Yisrael, but it's the same. Something comes out that is going to lead the Jewish people. That's a second repetition. And then third, right? Machatz pa'atei Moab, karkar kol b'nei Shet. Smashes, okay, so it changes Moab and Shet, but it smashes the brow and ruins the foundation, the children of Shet. Right? There is this duality in the pasuk. There's a repetition that runs throughout every first, second, and third parts of the pasuk. Right, what do you do with the repetition? Right, either we assume that God's a terrible author, but we don't want to assume that because, right, that's not very good, right? But if we assume obviously that it's intentional, it's there to teach us something. You could either take an Ibn Ezra approach that there's some poetic license in the Torah, and this is simply the way of poetry, but that's not generally how we are accustomed to reading Chumash. Right? Maybe Navi more, but Chumash, we generally like to see value in every word and believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't repeat something just for aesthetic beauty. Not that there's anything wrong with that approach, but it's not the one that we seem to have gravitated towards. We like to have meaning in every word. And therefore, the Or HaChaim explains as follows. So if you look at the bottom of the first page, we'll read it in the English. Actually, you know what? Jump back to the end of the second, the first English paragraph in the Or HaChaim. In the middle, right? He goes through all the differences that we just went through. And then he says where it says the entire prophecy. So it's 4 lines down in English. The entire prophecy concerns the Messiah. Right, he is on that same line as Yonatan ben Uziel. It's best understood in light of Sanhedrin 98, where the Talmud discusses the meaning of the apparently contradictory prophecy Be'ita achishena, right? At its appointed time, I will hasten it. Right? How can it be hastened if it's at appointed time? That is in Yeshayahu, and the Gemara there explains that if we merit, right, if we are actually worthy of Mashiach, it's going to be hastened, it's going to come quickly. But if not, it's going to come when it's supposed to come. And that's at a time later, right? That's his basic premise. If we deserve it, Mashiach comes faster. If we don't deserve it, then we have to wait. The Or HaChaim believes that the two pieces, this repetition in the pasuk, refers to two different methods of Mashiach's coming. Right? Mashiach could come quickly if we are worthy, or Mashiach could come slowly if we do not merit it. Right? And that's why, so Tamar mentioned before, Bar Kokhba maybe could have been the Mashiach. Right? I mean, Akiva thought he was the Mashiach. Maybe we didn't merit it. Right? Again, it's hard to know in the calculations. They're hard to kind of say anything with definitive, right? But you could have had Mashiachs that were throughout the generations, and maybe we didn't merit it, so Hashem didn't hasten it. Now it comes in its own time. But the Or HaChaim reads those two options into this pasuk, right? The bottom of the first page. Bilam speaks of two possible messianic scenarios, right? When Bilam speaks of Er'enu, I can see it, right? He refers to the scenario of Achishena, I will hasten it. Right? That is the first scenario that the pasuk talks about in Bilam is we deserve it and it comes quickly. It's hastened, it's moved along. That is erenu v'lo ata. It's not right now, but it's coming. I can see it because it's coming so quickly. Right? While it doesn't occur now, it may occur relatively soon. Ashurenu v'lo karov. If you jump down to the end of the second paragraph, right? It's not close. That's because we don't deserve it. It's not close. It's sometime off into the future. Right? And then he goes through, right, the rest of that pasuk. Right, Darach Kochab Yaakov is the first one. Kam Shevet Yisrael is the second. Right, Machatz Pa'atei Moab is the first, and then Karkar Kol B'nai Shet refers to the second. So each description of the process of Mashiach refers to one of those methods of Mashiach's coming. That I think is a fascinating way to. It's a fascinating way to read, right? To read the pasuk. It's certainly not the only way. And again, I don't actually. I'll say this. I don't mean this in any bad way. I don't think that these psukim, as interesting as they are, and as fascinating and amazing as his Chaim is, they're not really central to his argument. I think he just wants to build a tshuva with some divrei Torah to give it some body, to give it oomph. That's my sense of reading the tshuva, because when we see the end of the tshuva, the rest of the tshuva, you will see that I think that's what's happening. The last paragraph, though, on the source sheet, right, if you look, right, the fact that Bilam repeats both the description of the substance of the prophecy and the message itself in different words can also be understood by Sanhedrin 98. The sages draw a picture of the process of redemption due to Israel's merits as being quite different from what it would be like if it had to occur only in order to honor God's timetables. In the former event, the whole process would be orchestrated by Hashem. One miracle would follow another, right? If we deserve it and we merit it and it comes quickly, there is tremendous divine assistance, right? There are miracles. It's Kriyas Yamsuf all over again because we deserve it. Right? Jump a line after the Zohar. He said the Zohar describes these in great detail. I'm sure that is true. If the redemption occurs only as a result of God's timetable, decreeing that it cannot be delayed any further, it will be quite different, such as the prophet Zechariah describes in a vision of the Redeemer as being a poor man riding on the lowly donkey. Right? I mean, it comes slowly and it moves slowly, and it's a donkey. It's not on eagles on somebody's wings. There's no miracles. It's a donkey moving slowly, prodding along in this world natural. Right? That's what happens if we don't deserve it. It's a natural redemption that moves slowly with no miracles. Right? We like the former. It seems like we're experiencing the latter. Okay? And therefore, he says, when Bilam spoke of the arrival of the Messiah as a result of our merits, it's miraculous. He describes his arrival as similar to that of a star, because the star is in the heavens. It's amazing. It's celestial. It's divine. It's heavenly. Right? But a scepter of Jacob, whose hand is that in? Let's assume the star is in Hashem's hand. Whose hand is the scepter, the shevet, in? It's in ours. Right? It's in our hand. It's a natural thing. It is our Uzi, which is now retired, the Galil, the M16, whatever gun you want to choose, that's the scepter, but that's not a divine agent. That's in our hand. That's a human agency. That's a natural event. That's what the Chaim says. How does that now relate to this question? Any guesses? Where is he going from there?
I guess that Mashiach can come from very unlikely sources, like a lowly man riding a donkey. So too the people who are
right.
leading.
So he's clearly going in the direction. That's how he explains. Yeah. So that's how he's going to explain why today is a natural redemption. Right? Even though we do have hints of miracles and we can see God's hand in certain things, it's not overflowing miracles that are so abundant and clear. Like
read the stuff in the
Okay. So that, I think, number one, Barry's certainly right. Right? That's why we have a natural redemption. But why is it that it's not being led by frum people? So here, this is where it comes. It's so brilliant. Maybe it's even true, but it is incredibly brilliant. Maybe it's too smart. I don't know. He then says that if you look in the Gemara right, he said, if you look in Medrash Eicha, there is tremendous pessimism that we'll actually be able to really deserve it, right? That we're really going to get to a place where all of Am Yisrael is so good that we're going to get miracles, right? He believes that the consensus amongst Chazal is a pessimistic view of Jews, which I think history has borne out for the most part. We have never gotten to a point where we're all that spectacular, right? For all the good that we do, and there's a lot of good that we do, and this Torah that we learn, this chesed that we do, there's a lot that we do. People as a whole, are we all that tremendous? It's tough to say yes, right? That's hard to say yes. And therefore, he says, Chazal and the Gemara and Sanhedrin, for the most part, accept the viewpoint that this is going to be a natural redemption, because a natural redemption happens at the time that it is appointed, with the donkey riding, right, with Mashiach riding slowly on the donkey, right? And that is why, if you look at I think we referenced this last week, right, in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, there are all these calculations about the end of 6,000 years, right? So forget whether we know what that means or whether that's even true, or how you start counting 6,000 years. What does that actually mean? If there is a set time for Mashiach to come, which of the two options in the Orach Chaim is the Gemara presenting? The natural one, right? Meaning if it's a set time, it's because that's the time it's supposed to happen. If Hashem is hastening it, you can't predict a set time because it's going to be hastened. And therefore, he says that the Gemara more or less talks about set times. The Gemara also talks about all the wars that are going to precede Mashiach coming. Gog and Magog, we have in the Navi. The Gemara describes all the wars. That also testifies to a natural process, right? It's not miracles where right, Sancheir's army is just wiped out or whatever it is. It's a natural fight. People are going to die, right? A fight by its very nature, right, includes casualties and is a natural way of life, of the world. All right, and therefore he says it must be the Gemara. That's the Gemara's conclusion, right? There are other Gemaras that assume otherwise, but there's a fair amount of material in Sanhedrin that supports that conclusion, that indeed it's going to be a natural redemption, and it's going to be in our hands, and it's going to be at a set time because we don't necessarily deserve it. Now he makes a fascinating, yes. No, it's in our hands as opposed to miracles. I mean, the wars are going to, no, right, meaning it's not in our hands to bring, well, it is, we just don't get there, right? I mean, it's in our hands, but we're not quite getting there. Well, right, so Mark is saying it's not in our hands. Yes, I mean, we're not worthy of bringing Mashiach, but when the set time is decreed, the wars that ensue will indeed be in our hands because it will be a natural event, or a natural cycle of events. Now comes his argument. He says, if that is the consensus view, and anyone who's reading Sanhedrin can actually figure that out. Just gonna give a second, mute somebody, make sure everyone's right. What happens throughout history? Our history is full of terrible disasters, pogroms and crusades and holocausts and forced conversions. It's not a pretty history. What do you do when you're living through the crusades and you think that the only salvation you're going to have is a natural one? Right? He says the rabbis are faced with a choice. They can accept the Gemara literally, but what kind of hope is that going to give the people, right? Who in Germany in the 11th century is going to be comforted or have the faintest belief in a million years? Right, it took 1,000 years. In a million years, that they would be able to naturally bring themselves up, recreate a state, and bring themselves back to Israel, defend themselves. It wasn't in their imagination, given the persecutions that they have suffered. And
Yeah, isn't there one theory that Hashem will bring Mashiach, Gula, when things get so bad, he'll have no other choice?
And that's enough. Let's hope we don't get there.
No, but is it? But there is something like that. I mean, and historically, I think, unless I'm misunderstanding, another theory as to when it could come. But
so when it gets so bad, that Gemara does not mean a Holocaust. It means that the Jews are unworthy of redemption, right? I mean, it's two very different things. To define when it gets so bad is either when it gets so bad anti-Semitic, or when it gets so bad that there's no hope in the world that the Jews will ever right the ship, right? But the Gemara is talking about the latter, not about that. There is a natural reaction to every tragedy, October 7th included, right? This is so bad, Mashiach's coming. I hope they're right. But they said it after the Crusades too. It's been a long time, right? That was last year's year. Prognosticating about when Mashiach is coming is difficult. So Sid, I hope we never get to a point where there's so little Judaism that all hope is lost of ever having a religious people. I hope, but that idea, yes, it's out there. It's not one that he discusses in the Tshuva. It is absolutely out there, and I hope we never get there. Collectively, we should all never hit that point. But yes, that idea is certainly out there. So back to this, right? What he says is consensus view is we're never going to, not that we might not get to the point where it's so bad, but we're not going to be at the point where we're so good. So we're relying on a natural, a natural process where we ourselves defend ourselves in the land of Israel and establish a state. And he says throughout our history, the rabbis just couldn't have imagined that. People couldn't have imagined it. So what they did was they created a scenario, and they envisioned a scenario, and they taught a scenario where the messianic arrival is miraculous, right? That is why Tosfos says, as opposed to the Rambam, right? The Rambam says Mashiach's going to build the Beis Hamikdash. Tosfos says it's coming down from heaven in fire, right? Chaim David Halevi says, you know why Tosfos said that? Because of the Crusades, right? Because the Jews couldn't have imagined a Jew going to Israel, building a Beis Hamikdash. It's impossible. So they went the other way, and they convinced all from people that the redemption is going to be miraculous. It's going to be divine. It's going to be spectacular. And that's what he said, that's what gave Jews faith throughout the centuries and throughout the generations. Now comes the kicker, okay? Now he says, so that's what he thinks happens. And he says that slowly over centuries, hishtarsha, right? It became rooted in our nation, a belief in a miraculous divine redemption, because that's all they could have. It's all they could have fathomed. But now he says, right? It's so brilliant. It's frightening. Now what happens? Kasher higia eight dodim. It comes a beloved time, right? Yisrael. The time comes for Hashem to redeem us. B'chinat ba'ata bi'ita. It's the time, right, for the natural redemption. How do frum Jews react to the natural redemption when for centuries and centuries they have been taught it's exactly the opposite? You know what they did? They rejected it because it didn't fit what their fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers and sisters and brothers and their bubbies and everybody has been taught, right? He said that root, the belief is so rooted that when reality came and it was time to be redeemed, the overwhelming majority of the frum community had to reject it because it went against their mistaken beliefs. Right? That's a fascinating argument, I have to say. It's so fascinating because it's right, right? And therefore he says, right, it's an amazing line. The Dafka Shlomei, right, Shlomei Emunei Yisrael, the ones the most faithful of Israel, are the ones who fervently fought against the Zionist Medina, right? Because they didn't understand that it wasn't miraculous. It didn't fit their worldview and they rejected it out of hand. Now, this is brilliant. Who's left? Who's left to be God's agent when all the frum people have rejected God? Who's left? The people who have thrown off the old of Torah and mitzvos, who don't have this preconceived notion that it has to be divine. They are the ones who are left doing God's work. It's sort of brilliant, right? It's, again, I'm sure there's more to it, but that's a piece of it, right? It doesn't fit the narrative. So we throw it out. Even though God's doing miracles for you, we reject it because it doesn't fit our narrative. But then he does say at the end, right? Omnam zachu gam me'atim mishlumei emunei Yisrael shamrei Torah mitzvot. Right? We have merited that we do have some of the faithful in Israel, keepers of Torah mitzvos. Right? And at their head, Rabbanim Ugdolei Torah, rabbis and great people in Torah, who also support the nation. Right? But in general, he says the Geula came by Anashim Chilonim, because that's who was left to do God's bidding. That is a fascinating theory of why the state had to be founded by those who were not keepers of Torah and mitzvahs. It's original, it's brilliant, it's kind of fascinating. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
It was Rav Kook's philosophy. I mean, I know Rav Kook looked at non-Torah observing Zionists as sort of the messengers of God. Is this similar to his philosophy? The tshuva?
Rav Kook. So I don't speak about Rav Kook's philosophy because I have no idea what Rav Kook's philosophy is. Right, I think Rav Kook saw sparks of kedusha in places that people didn't really believe they had them. Rav Kook also, this I heard from Rav Moshe Lichtenstein, so I'm assuming it's true about Rav Kook, that Rav Kook had a different view of Eretz Yisrael than we do, right? It's a holy place, but in Rav Kook's worldview, it's almost an organism in and of itself with a sanctity that we can't fathom. It's different, right? Which is why, right, you're willing to sacrifice maybe more than others would be willing in the Cookian world for the land, right? Is land more valuable than people? At some level, Rav Kook believed the land was more valuable. Right, the Rav thought that was heresy. He thought he disagreed with that vehemently. Right, and that's part of the land for peace debate between those schools and all of that. I don't know if I'm about Cook to answer that question. It's a good question, but we should ask a Rav Kook scholar. You can email Yehuda Morsky. I see what he thinks. Mark.
Even though the founders were non-religious cults, how can you not see that it's somewhat of a miracle that the UN voted and that we were able to survive? Like, that whole thing was that. How can that not be miraculous? That we fought off all the war. Like, I mean, that's pretty easy to go that route, to go, wow, look what just happened. Who would have fathomed that? I mean, they went the other way, going, it didn't come down from heaven as one piece. It didn't.
So I think you're underestimating the power of hashkafa. Right, when the hashkafa is set, it is immovable.
That's just going to come right down.
That's it, and it's miraculous.
So
if it doesn't fit the narrative, and it's not from Hashem. There is more to it, but as a basic approach, I think this is certainly a fascinating approach. Anybody else? Yes. One last question. Okay, I'm happy to take any more, but give Mark one more question.
Okay. So it's said that Mashiach is going to come, we just don't know it. Or is it possible we're never going to merit it?
No, Mashiach is going to come, right? There's one opinion in the Gemara that we blew it, but everyone rejects that, right? Hillel says that Tzidkiyahu should have been Mashiach, or Chizkiyahu should have been Mashiach, but We lost it, so Hill says no Mashiach, but nobody actually believes that, which is good. Yeah, Barry.
No, it's really sort of probably too long an answer for a short question, but what's Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Aaron Lichtenstein and Rav Amital's view of this question?
So I think that their view is similar to that of Rav Tabori's before, which I'm sure is part of where he got it, right? Is, so Rav Amital used to tell us stories of 1948 and seeing Hashem. He saw Hashem's hand in Auschwitz, and he lived through 1948. For them, the history of it was just so overwhelmingly conclusive that they were living. Now, Rav Amital had shifts in his messianism, right? In 1973 was a shift for him. I think pre-1973, he was certainly there was more messianic overtones, less so afterwards, or certainly dampened. But I think the fact that we returned to Eretz Yisrael, that we were victorious in war. I've told this story before, but Rav Amital showed up in 1948 being a Hungarian yeshiva student, and he came to fight in the War of Independence. And some guy says to him, "Have you handled the gun before?" He said, "Yes." So I said, "Good, you are now in charge of 20 men." He goes, "I don't know anything about war. I mean, I'm a Hungarian yeshiva student who was in labor camps and concentration camps. I don't know from war." The guy looks at him and says, "At least you've handled the gun. Take your guys and go." Right? To win a war like that is a miracle. Meaning, living through that and seeing it, I think that it made a tremendous impact on him, like it did many others. Right? You just see God's hand in history, and it speaks to you. I think for Rav Lichtenstein was the same. Right? I think he was certainly influenced by the Rav.
Right.
But in the story he tells about why he made Aliyah in 1971, right? The yeshiva was founded, I think, in 68. Rav Amital invites Rav Lichtenstein to come and join him. He was the heir apparent to the Rav at YU, right? The Melucha was his. I mean, it was his for the taking. I don't think there's any question. No disrespect to Rabbi Schachter or anybody else at YU. He was the heir apparent. It would have been his yeshiva. And the analogy that he gave us was, why would I sit in the stands of a baseball game when I can play on the field? Right? That was the analogy. You like baseball analogies. Right? Why should I sit on the sidelines in America when I can live history in the land of Israel? Right? Jews returning to the land of Israel. So I think theirs was a much more, historical. I don't know what they would have done with such an approach per se.
Right.
Although I'm not sure that that's not consistent with this. But I think for them, it was simply just living through it and seeing it and witnessing miracles, and that, a return to Israel after 2,000 years. Like, there's a lot to be said for just seeing Hashem in history and appreciating it and marching forward.
So question then.
Yeah.
According to this, I guess what we're in is it. It's the natural as opposed to the supernatural. It's that we didn't merit.
Right.
So it's happening now. So then how would he account for the ups and downs? In other words, everything's going forward and then all these setbacks.
So Rabbi Riskin once said that's why Mashiach comes in a donkey. Goes this way, goes that way. It's not a straightforward it doesn't have to be a direct linear process.
Okay, so to give us hope, this is it. According to this approach, we're in it. Whether
yes. Now,
right
now there's a secondary argument whether could you blow it? That's another argument.
Could you blow it if it's not something we? And as according to this approach, we either merit it or it's coming because there's a specific time.
Right. So this approach is, and I think Rav Meidan, I think this is an argument between Rav Meidan and Ramosha in the Gush. Right, Ramosha thinks that we might be able to blow it. Rav Meidan thinks this is it. This is it. Once we're back in Israel, we're on a trajectory. But we zig, we zag, we come forward, we go back. It's natural, right? It's not miraculous, but It happens to be that that's the question of next week's tshuva. So stay tuned. It's another great tshuva next week. But that even that we believe that this is it, it doesn't mean that it's linear, right? I mean, we can go, we zig and we zag, and the donkey keeps chugging. But I think we all should be hopeful. Somebody asked me that yesterday, the day before. I think long term I'm hopeful. Short term is hard, but long term I do remain hopeful. All right. Well, thank you everyone.